What's going on, everybody? Welcome to a gamer log. I wanted to talk about one of my favorite series of all time, Final Fantasy. Now, let me put an asterisk on that and say mostly all Final Fantasies. I've had my ones to where they're just like, I haven't even played them, not sure I ever will. And others are just like, why? You know, notably, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 2, obviously. 12 was good. 13 was great. 13 2 was okay. And then Lightning Returns was really good, although I wasn't a fan of the time system they had going. I'm not a fan of being forced into a certain time element. I like to play my way through the game and explore without having to worry about the world ending, basically. 15 was really good. I really enjoyed 15. I cannot see myself getting Final Fantasy 16 as of this recording, although I may get it in the future. I loved 1. 1 was fairly brutal, in my opinion, because of the open map. You didn't know what you were wandering into. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I don't really have an opinion on, either because I didn't get to play them fully, I touched on them and I just put them down, or I didn't get a chance to actually play them. So it just really depends on which one it is. But with that said, Crystal Bears, wasn't a big fan. Crystal Chronicles, wasn't a big fan. Tactics, I really liked. Let's see, what else was there? Final Fantasy. World of Final Fantasy was pretty cool. I never beat it. I did play it for a bit, but it was a really cool concept. And then there's, of course, some spin-offs of Final Fantasy. I will say Final Fantasy is responsible for getting me into Kingdom Hearts. And the fact that they didn't include more Final Fantasy characters in 3 left me very disappointed, although I did enjoy 3. I thought it was a really good game. But it would be number 3 on the list. 2 would be number 1, and number 1 would be number 2. But 3's at the bottom when it comes to the Kingdom Hearts. I didn't play any of the great Game Boy Advance Kingdom Hearts because of the card-based system. I wasn't a big fan. I do remember touching on Birth by Sleep, but there's that. So, but all-time favorite Final Fantasy titles. 10-2, Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 7, would be my top 3. Would be my top 3. Why not Final Fantasy 10? Because I played Final Fantasy 10-2. And 10-2 I enjoyed a lot more, story-wise, gameplay-wise, mechanics, whatnot. Don't get me wrong, I love 10. I really do. But, much like my mentality with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit appealed to me more because it was more humor and it was a lot more fun. Lord of the Rings, as much as I love it, and I know I will probably make people facepalm. But if I'm being honest, comparing the two, when you watch The Hobbit and then you watch Lord of the Rings, it looks like Lord of the Rings is taking itself too seriously. That's just my opinion. And when you play 10-2 and you look at 10, it's kind of the same thing. I hate to say that, but it's kind of the same thing. It's also kind of the same thing with Fantastic Beasts when you watch Harry Potter. Man, I am entering some territories. So there's that. So that's why not 10. Final Fantasy overall. Final Fantasy was my childhood for about 5 or 6 years. I learned a lot of good life lessons from Final Fantasy. Because Japanese RPGs, when I was first introduced to them, 7 was my first introduction. I loved books. I still love books. I don't have a lot of time to read nowadays, but I still listen to a bunch of audiobooks because I love a good narrative. I love a good story. That's most of the reason why I play those games on this channel. It's because I love what stories represent. I just recently touched on this in another vlog, a lot more serious vlog. But there's human elements. There's human characterizations. There's events. There's morals. There's teachings. There's hand-me-down knowledge in these events, even though it's, for the most part, wrapped in fantasy. But it's touched on because it's, human written. It's written by human beings. It's produced by human beings. And 8, especially 8, impacted me in a lot of ways. Because Squall hit home the things that dude went through at his age, being military, being put in these positions, and of course there's that wild theory that he may or may not be dead at the end. I don't believe that personally, but there's theories out there. Him and Renoa, greatest Final Fantasy power couple ever. I know a lot of people argue Cloud and Tifa, Cloud and Eris, that's fine, whatever. And I'm not mocking them. I think they are good power couples. But to me, Squall and Renoa make a lot of sense because they're night and day. Literally night and day if you look at their character elements. Renoa's very bright, very cheery, very hopeful. Squall, very broody. He's basically Batman, let's be honest. He's kind of emo. And I love that balance. Of course, with that said, Aerith and Cloud are kind of the same way in ways. But that just works. That just works in that story element. I will say another great power couple is Beatrix and Steiner from Final Fantasy IX. That is a cool couple. A badass couple. So that's really cool. But 8 hit home for me. 8 is my heart. And at some point in my life, for a long time, for about 10 to 15 years now, I have contemplated off and on about getting a tattoo that's got a gunblade in it. It's in the sand. And it says, "I'll be here, ... It's really cool. And if you know anything about the intro to Final Fantasy VIII, it makes sense. Also, probably the best intro, if we're being totally honest. Probably the best intro in any game I've ever seen. I loved it. And it makes just for... Back in the day, I made some AMVs for Final Fantasy, and I loved doing it. I loved it. If you don't know what AMVs are, they're animated music videos. You took cutscenes from old games, from anime and whatnot. I know people do that nowadays, but back in my day, I did Final Fantasy, Dino Crisis, Silent Hill. Of course, you put them up on YouTube nowadays, and most of them are just knocked out because of copyright. But you basically took one of your favorite songs, mashed it up. I even did it for Dragon Ball Z at one point, including Dead Cell by Papa Roach. I did it to Gohan fighting Cell. Very appropriate. It was really cool, but 8 is my heart. So, but no, it had a big impact on me growing up. The characters, the situations, the games. You got what you paid for. A lot of people... Okay, so here's the thing, right? People think Final Fantasy... A couple things about Final Fantasy that people, I think, tend to question, or they tend to ask you, well, but is it the actual Final Fantasy? It's part of the title. Why is it like Final Fantasy 16 and whatnot? It's a title. You're reading too much into it. Although with that said, there is a story behind it, because it did save a studio. It saved Squaresoft. It saved Square, actually. Squaresoft. Square, I forget which one they were. I think it was Squaresoft. Final Fantasy was their Bon Voyage game. The studio was about to go out, from what I remember. And the title did really well on NES. It did really well. And, of course, it was Final Fantasy Adventure, I think, for Nintendo Game Boy. Never played it. Not sure. But it was their final game, their Final Fantasy game. And it works. To me, it works. So you can't really change the name because of a best-selling game. You can't really change it because then you lose the recognition. So it's stuck with Final Fantasy. And I'm an FF fanatic. So, I love it. Of course, notably, Square Enix has produced a lot of other great titles, including Tomb Raider, another one of my top favorites. And there's been others. Super Mario Legend of the Seven Stars, another classic RPG that needs to be re-released at some point. Make it happen. Hey, who knows? Maybe somewhere in the future it is re-released. You never know. But no, look, above all, I just wanted to talk about one of my favorite titles, favorite series, favorite sagas ever. With that, Final Fantasy Spirits Within, the movie was good. I liked it. It was good for its time. It was pretty awesome. Final Fantasy Advent Children, fucking phenomenal. Final Fantasy VII Remake, as of this recording, great. Beat it twice. Don't have it on PC yet, but I will get it eventually. The Final Fantasy VIII Remaster was really good. PSP, Final Fantasy Crisis Core, great game. Prequel to Final Fantasy VII, obviously. They are remaking, as of this recording, we're getting the Final Fantasy Episode 2. Final Fantasy VII Remake Episode 2-ish. But it was great. They're kind of touching on the multiverse in these newer games, in these remakes, and I love it. Will they do that with 8? I don't know. I kind of hope they will. Because 8 had some great relatable comedy story elements that I think could do really good. Another notable staple about Final Fantasy that I loved, I fell in love with the instant I saw it, aside from the battle system, aside from the stories, and aside from the composers of the music, guardian forces, summons, whatever you want to call them. These powerful godlike creatures that you summon into being, ethers, espers, whatever. God, they were awesome. 7 really grabbed me with Knights of the Round, Ifrit, Shiva, but 8 really got me. 8 really got me with Doom Train. All kinds. It was just, it's crazy. Now, one of the things I love about 10, 2 of my favorite characters in 10. Auron. I love Auron. Auron's my favorite character above all. Pretty much out of Final Fantasy in general, if I'm being honest. And it also has my top favorite summon ever, which is Anima. If you don't know much about Anima, look him up. I'm also sorry my camera's freezing up off and on. It's probably been doing it most of this video, but it is what it is. Anima is fucking phenomenal. He is a really cool summon. And there's a duality there of a tortured king and his repentance. Look up the lore behind it. I think you might be surprised. It's pretty awesome. But anyway, bit of a gamer talk, especially for any Final Fantasy fanatics out there. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you hanging out. Stay safe. Stay sane. Remember, you're awesome. Never let the world tell you otherwise. See ya.